The Secretary General arrives. September 13th, 1961. Ndola, northern Rhodesia. The night air hums with insects and distant engines. Floodlights carve pale cones across the tarmac as a silver DC-6B rolls to a stop. Its propellers wind down with a tired whine, metal ticking as it cools. A handful of airport workers watch from behind a rope line. No banners, no anthem, no honor guard. Inside the cabin, a tall man in a dark suit tightens his tie and reaches for a folder worn thin at the edges. The cover bears no markings, no seal, no flag. He prefers it that way. His name is Dag Hammarskjöld. And at this moment, unknown to nearly everyone waiting beyond the glass, both the CEO and the Hagiognan KGB are watching his movements with equal unease. You can hear the door open. The night rushes in. Somewhere far away, thunder mutters over the African plateau. Hammarskjöld steps onto the stairs alone. The world he inherited. A decade earlier, Dag Hammarskjöld had been a civil servant in Stockholm, an economist, a poet, a man more comfortable with books than bombast. In 1953, he was elected Secretary General of the United Nations. A compromise candidate acceptable to Washington and Moscow precisely because they believed he would be harmless. They were wrong. By the summer of 1960, the Cold War had spread far beyond Berlin and Korea. It had reached Africa, where empires were collapsing faster than new nations could stabilize. The Congo, vast, mineral-rich, strategically priceless, had just declared independence from Belgium. Within days, the country imploded. The army mutinied. European officers fled. Belgian troops returned to protect civilians. And in the southern province of Katanga, Ostau's, a Western-backed secession ripped the country in two. Copper, uranium, and cobalt, resources vital to nuclear weapons, lay at the heart of the breakaway state. Washington saw chaos. Moscow saw opportunity. And the United Nations, still young, still untested, stood in the middle. At its head stood Dag Hammarskjöld. A dangerous definition of neutrality. Hammarskjöld believed neutrality was not passivity. It was action without allegiance. A principle that made both superpowers deeply uncomfortable. When Congolese Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba asked for Soviet assistance to expel Belgian forces, Hammarskjöld refused to allow UN aircraft to be used for Soviet troops. When Western governments demanded that the UN crush Lumumba's government outright, he refused that too. To Washington, he was obstructive. To Moscow, he was duplicitous. To both, he was unpredictable. Behind closed doors, CIA analysts circulated memos questioning whether the Secretary General was exceeding his mandate. In Moscow, KGB officers noted with irritation that Hammarskjöld did not respond to pressure like other diplomats. He did not threaten. He did not posture. Often, he did not reply at all. Silence, wielded with intent. The man who wouldn't be managed. Hammarskjöld worked late into the night, alone, drafting cables by hand. He distrusted entourages. He disliked advisors who spoke too quickly. When he traveled light. Those who met him described the same unsettling impression. Calm without warmth. Courtesy without concession. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was precise and final. In New York, CIA liaison officers struggled to read him. He never signaled which way he leaned. He met Soviet diplomats without informing the Americans. He met Americans without informing the Soviets. And when asked directly where he stood, he quoted the UN Charter and changed the subject. By late 1960, both intelligence services had reached the same conclusion. Dag Hammarskjöld could not be controlled. Brewster, the Congo tightens. The situation in the Congo deteriorated by the week. Lumumba was overthrown, arrested, and, despite international outcry, murdered in January 1961. Evidence would later surface of Western complicity. The Soviets exploded with rage, accusing Hammarskjöld of enabling a colonial crime. At the United Nations General Assembly, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev took the podium and pounded his shoe, demanding Hammarskjöld's resignation. He proposed replacing the Secretary General with a three-man troika. One from the West, one from the East, one from the non-aligned world. Hammarskjöld listened in silence. He did not resign. Instead, he escalated the UN mission in the Congo. ONUC, authorizing peacekeepers to use force to prevent Katanga's secession. It was the first time the UN would attempt such an operation. Washington was furious. Moscow was suspicious. Both wondered the same thing. Who does this man think he is? A flight into the dark. By September 1961, the situation reached a breaking point. UN troops clashed with Katangan forces. The risk of direct superpower confrontation loomed. Hammarskjöld made a decision that stunned his staff. He would fly to Africa himself to meet Moise Tshombe, the Katangan leader, in person. No intermediaries, no guarantees. On the night of September 17th, Hammarskjöld boarded a UN-marked DC-6 near Leopoldville. He carried no weapon, no escort of soldiers, only documents and a quiet resolve. In Langley, CIA night watch officers logged the departure with concern. In Moscow, KGB cables flagged the flight as irregular and high risk. Neither side attempted to stop him. Neither side quite knew how. Watching and waiting. Back at Ndola airfield, the workers step back as Hammarskjöld reaches the tarmac. His shoes scuff against concrete. He pauses, looking out into the darkness beyond the lights. Toward the Congo, toward a conflict that refuses to obey the Cold War's rules. He does not know, cannot know, that this flight will be his last. He only knows that standing still is no longer an option. In the shadows beyond the runway, unseen by those on the ground, forces far larger than any one man continue to calculate, to plan, to hesitate. Because Dag Hammarskjöld has done something no one expected. He has stepped forward without choosing a side. The silence that alarmed them. September 17th, 1961. Ndola Airfield, Northern Rhodesia. The engines of the DC-6B rumble low and steady, propellers biting into the warm African night. Inside the cockpit, the red instrument lights glow softly, reflecting off the pilots' faces. Radio static crackles, then clears. UN 6867, you are cleared for departure. The aircraft begins to move. From the control tower, a lone air traffic officer watches the plane roll forward, its navigation lights blinking red, green, and white. To him, it's just another late-night flight. To men sitting in offices thousands of miles away, in Langley, Virginia, and Moscow's Lubyanka building, it is something else entirely. It is an unscripted variable, and unscripted variables terrify empires. Langley, an uncooperative Secretary General. At CIA headquarters, the Congo crisis has its own room. Wall-sized maps, colored pins marking UN troop movements, Katangan strongholds, Belgian advisors, Soviet diplomatic missions. Analysts shuffle papers under fluorescent lights that never quite turn off. A junior officer reads aloud from a cable. Secretary General Hammarskjöld departing Ndola for undisclosed meeting with Chomba. No American personnel involved. Silence follows. A senior analyst exhales slowly. He didn't inform state? No, sir. Did he request security assistance? No, sir. The room absorbs that. For over a year, the agency has tried to predict Hammarskjöld's moves, failed repeatedly. He does not leak. He does not hint. He does not seek reassurance. And most unsettling of all, he does not seem afraid. To Washington, the Congo is not about principle. It is about uranium from Shinkolobwe, once used in the Manhattan Project. About denying Moscow influence in the heart of Africa. About ensuring that newly independent nations do not drift toward socialism by default. Hammarskjöld's insistence on an independent UN mission threatens that calculus. One CIA memorandum, circulated weeks earlier, had summarized the problem bluntly. None. The Secretary General appears motivated by personal conviction rather than alignment. This limits leverage. Leverage is the currency of intelligence, and Dag Hammarskjöld refuses to trade in it. Bestar Moscow, a bourgeois idealist, or something worse? In Moscow, the tone is different, but the conclusion is the same. At KGB headquarters, a foreign intelligence officer taps ash from his cigarette into a glass tray. Across the table, a superior studies a translated UN transcript of Hammarskjöld's latest speech. He speaks of law, the superior says, of neutrality, of principles. The officer shrugs. Western hypocrisy, perhaps, the superior replies. But he is not following Western orders. That is the problem. To the Soviets, Hammarskjöld is dangerous not because he is American, but because he is not obedient. He blocks Soviet access to the Congo, yet also blocks NATO control. He condemns colonialism, yet restrains revolutionary violence. He does not fit the dialectic, and men who do not fit ideology cannot be predicted. A KGB cable notes the flight to Ndola and adds a line, almost as an afterthought. Outcome uncertain. Monitor closely. Monitor, but do not intervene. Not yet. The choice he made alone, inside the aircraft. Hammarskjöld sits with a folder on his lap. The cabin hum is constant, hypnotic. He rereads notes for the meeting that may or may not happen. Moise Chomba is a businessman, a nationalist, and, depending on who you ask, a puppet of Belgian mining interests. Hammarskjöld believes something else. He believes Chomba is afraid of losing power, afraid of being abandoned, afraid of becoming expendable once the superpowers are done with him. Hammarskjöld understands fear. He also understands pride. That is why he came alone. No troops, no threats, no promises he cannot keep. Only the weight of legitimacy. To aides who begged him not to go, he had said quietly, "Dar, the United Nations cannot ask men to risk their lives if it will not risk its own." It is not a heroic statement. It is a managerial one. And that is precisely what makes it terrifying. A pattern of refusal. This is not the first time Hammarskjöld has refused the logic of the Cold War. In 1954, he negotiated the release of American pilots captured by China, without public credit, without concessions. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, he defied Britain, France, and Israel simultaneously, helping create the first true UN peacekeeping force. Each time the same pattern emerged. He acted quietly. He informed no one until it was done. And afterward, no one could quite argue with the result. CIA officers called it arrogance. KGB officers called it deception. But both noticed the same thing. He never asked permission. The flight path. The DC-6 cruises at altitude, slicing through thin cloud. Below, the African landscape is invisible. black and endless. In the cockpit, the navigator checks coordinates. Ndola to Ndola Airport, then onward to a small airstrip near the Congo border. Weather reports are mixed, visibility uncertain. Should be fine, the captain mutters. Behind them, Hammarskjöld closes his eyes. Not to sleep, but to think. If Chombe agrees to talks, Katanga may rejoin the Congo peacefully. UN troops can disengage. The spiral toward superpower confrontation can slow. If he refuses, Hammarskjöld does not finish the thought. That too is a kind of discipline. Nerver, a shared unease. Back in Washington, a CIA officer lingers after his shift ends. He stares at the Congo map, at the UN flag pins scattered across it. He's playing a dangerous game. He says to no one in particular. In Moscow, a KGB analyst makes a similar remark, in a different language, under different portraits. Both men sense it. Not conspiracy, not control, but something rarer, or a man acting beyond the script. And when the script breaks, history becomes unstable. Approaching Ndola, the aircraft begins its descent. Outside, clouds thicken. Rain speckles the windshield. The runway lights ahead are faint, blurred by mist. Visibility's dropping, the first officer says. Keep her steady, the captain replies. In the cabin, Hammarskjöld opens his eyes as the plane shudders slightly. He grips the armrest, not in fear, but awareness. He has made his choice, not to side with east or west, not to yield to pressure, not to retreat into safety, but to stand alone, between forces that measure power in megatons and casualties. The descent continues, and somewhere in the dark below, history waits. The night the world lost its neutral man. September 18th, 1961. Near Ndola, northern Rhodesia. In 010 hours, the rain comes down harder now, drumming against metal and glass. Inside the cockpit, the windshield is a blur of water and darkness, runway lights wavering like distant stars sinking into mist. Altitude dropping. Keep her steady. The DC-6B shudders, not violently, but enough to be felt. Engines hold their rhythm. Instruments flicker as the pilots lean forward, straining their eyes into the night. Below them, the African bush stretches unseen, flat, black, unforgiving. In the cabin, Dag Hammarskjöld grips the armrest as turbulence ripples through the fuselage. His face remains composed. This is not fear. It is awareness. The kind that comes when a man knows he has crossed the final threshold of choice. The aircraft descends. Then silence. Not the calm silence Hammarskjöld mastered, but the sudden, absolute silence of interruption. Drasner impact. The crash is not heard in Ndola. There is no explosion to light the sky. No fireball visible from the airfield. Only a dull, distant thud swallowed by rain and forest. 11 miles short of the runway, the DC-6B tears through treetops, wings shearing branches, fuselage breaking apart on impact. Metal folds, glass shatters. Darkness closes in. By the time the rain settles, there is nothing left that resembles an aircraft. Only wreckage scattered across the bush and the still forms of 16 men. Dag Hammarskjöld is among them. The waiting. At Ndola Airfield, the clock ticks past midnight. Controllers wait for the landing confirmation that never comes. Radio calls go unanswered. UN 6867, Ndola Tower. Do you read? Static. A supervisor steps closer to the radio console. Another message is sent. Then another. Outside, the runway lights remain on, glowing uselessly into the rain. Something is wrong. Zamdromer. Discovery at first light. At dawn, African villagers moving through the bush come across debris, twisted aluminum, torn fabric, scorched earth. Smoke rises faintly through the trees. Word spreads quickly. By mid-morning, colonial authorities reach the site. Soldiers push through tall grass. Cameras appear. So do questions. The wreckage lies scattered in a pattern that immediately raises eyebrows among experienced investigators. Too wide. Too irregular. Bodies are found away from the main fuselage. And Hammarskjöld's, his suit torn, his face marked by injuries inconsistent with simple impact, lies some distance from the aircraft. Within hours, the story begins to fracture. No. Ronderhasher ear. The official explanation. Initial reports move fast. Pilot error. Poor visibility. Controlled flight into terrain. The aircraft, officials say, descended too early. The crew misjudged altitude in bad weather. Case closed. But not everyone accepts it. Local witnesses speak of a second aircraft in the sky that night. A flash, a sound not consistent with an engine failure. Their testimony is quietly dismissed. In New York, UN officials request a full investigation. In Washington and Moscow, the response is the same, but for different reasons. Careful distance. Yerbanasibroor. Langley reacts. At CIA headquarters, news of the crash arrives before dawn. An officer reads the cable twice, then a third time. Secretary General deceased. The room is silent. No one celebrates. No one mourns openly. But there is a subtle shift, an easing of pressure that no one names. One analyst finally speaks. Well, that simplifies things. No one contradicts him. The Congo operation will continue. But now, without Hammarskjöld's unpredictable hand guiding it. In a private memo, a senior official writes only one line, variable removed. The Graz, Moscow takes note. In Moscow, the tone is colder. KGB analysts review reports with skepticism. The idea that Hammarskjöld would simply make a fatal mistake does not sit well. He was meticulous, controlled, disciplined. But the official Soviet position remains cautious. No accusations. No mourning beyond formal statements. No demands for inquiry beyond the expected. Privately, a KGB officer remarks, he was inconvenient. Another replies, he was dangerous. And that is as far as the conversation goes. Zara. The vacuum. At the United Nations, the corridors feel different. Hammarskjöld's office remains untouched for days. Papers still stacked neatly. His handwritten notes still on the desk. The silence he cultivated lingers. Heavy now, no longer intentional. Delegates move more loudly, speak more openly, take sides more clearly. Without Hammarskjöld, the UN becomes what the superpowers always assumed it would be. A forum, not an actor. The Congo drifts further into violence. Katanga remains unstable. Peacekeeping becomes containment. History resumes its familiar pattern. Us.
Yes, Karn. The questions that would not die.
Years pass. Investigations are launched. Closed. Reopened. Closed again. UN Commission note inconsistencies. Ballistics experts question damage patterns. Declassified files hint at surveillance, at intercepted communications, at interests that extended far beyond Ndola. No definitive proof emerges. Only shadows, only motives, only the uncomfortable truth that Hammarskjöld's death benefited everyone who had feared his independence. No. Legacy of a silence. Dag Hammarskjöld left no manifesto, no final speech, no explanation. Only a record of decisions made without permission, and a death that removed him at the moment he was most dangerous to the logic of the Cold War. He never chose East, he never chose West, and in a world that demanded allegiance above all else, that refusal may have been the most radical act of all. The rain that fell over Ndola washed away footprints, but it did not wash away doubt. After the crash, what the silence concealed. September 19th, 1961. New York City, United Nations headquarters. Morning light filters weakly through the tall glass windows of the Secretariat building. The flag outside hangs at half-staff, its movement slow, almost reluctant. Inside, the building hums, but differently now. Conversations stop when footsteps approach. Doors close more carefully. Dag Hammarskjöld is gone, and with his death, something else has vanished as well. The illusion that neutrality could survive the Cold War. The first inquiry. Within hours of confirmation, the United Nations orders an investigation. Officially, it is procedural. Privately, it is urgent. Aviation experts arrive in Ndola. Crash specialists photograph wreckage angles, measure debris fields, examine engine fragments. Their notebooks fill with questions that have no neat answers. The wreckage pattern bothers them. It is too spread out, too inconsistent with a simple descent error, too quiet. One investigator crouches beside a torn section of fuselage, rainwater pooling in the metal folds. He traces a finger along an edge, cleaner than expected. He says nothing, but he writes everything down. Witnesses, no one wanted. Villagers are interviewed. They speak carefully, aware of uniforms and authority. Still, the accounts align in unsettling ways. A second aircraft, a flash in the sky, a sound like gunfire or something sharper. These statements are recorded, then quietly set aside. Unreliable, one official notes. Night conditions, another adds. In the final report draft, the testimonies do not appear, not because they were disproven, but because they were inconvenient. Number. Washington's distance. In Washington, the State Department issues a statement of regret. Hammarskjöld is praised as a dedicated international civil servant. Flags are lowered. Words are chosen carefully. Behind closed doors, the tone shifts. Congo briefings resume without delay. Military advisors speak more freely now. Intelligence estimates sharpen. Options once blocked by Hammarskjöld's objections re-enter circulation. A senior official remarks quietly, "At least now there's clarity." Clarity, in this case, means alignment. The CIA does not request a deeper inquiry. It does not oppose one either. Silence is sufficient. Oh, Verber. Moscow's calculated restraint. In Moscow, the response is equally measured. Pravda publishes a restrained obituary. Hammarskjöld is described as flawed, bourgeois, but committed to peace. The implication is clear. His death is tragic, but not destabilizing. Privately, KGB analysts remain uneasy. If Hammarskjöld could be removed so cleanly, so ambiguously, what did that say about the safety of others who stepped outside the lines? No conclusions are drawn aloud. In the Soviet system, caution is a survival instinct. The second report. Months later, a second UN investigation is convened. More thorough, more technical. Again, inconsistencies surface. No clear mechanical failure, no definitive pilot mistake. Weather alone insufficient. The conclusion is carefully phrased. The cause of the crash cannot be determined with certainty. It is the language of institutions under pressure. It satisfies no one. It accuses no one. And that, perhaps, is the point. Zuska a world without its neutral man. By 1962, the Cold War accelerates. The Cuban Missile Crisis brings the world to the edge of nuclear annihilation. In Africa, proxy conflicts multiply. Peacekeeping missions become buffers, not solutions. The United Nations adapts, but within narrower limits. Successive secretaries general are more cautious, more consultative, more aware of the boundaries Hammarskjöld had ignored. No one says it openly, but everyone remembers what happened to the man who didn't ask permission. Or, Beerhornsterker Warren, files, years later, decades pass, archives open, documents are declassified, marginal notes surface, cryptic, incomplete, references to intercepted radio traffic, mentions of aircraft in the area that were never officially logged, intelligence assessments that stop mid-paragraph. Nothing conclusive, everything suggestive. Historians argue. Journalists dig. Families of the dead wait. The truth remains just out of reach. Close enough to disturb, too distant to confirm. Vermasterbeführer. The cost of standing still. Dag Hammarskjöld once wrote in his private journal, and the road to wisdom is paved with silence. It was not a warning, it was an acceptance. He understood the risk. He took it anyway. Because in a world divided into sides, someone had to prove that principle itself could be a position. His death did not end that idea, but it made the cost unmistakably clear. The silence after Ndola was not empty. It was full of calculations, relief, fear, and unresolved truth. And it still echoes. The echo that never faded, undated, years later. Geneva, Switzerland. Snow drifts softly outside a quiet study. Inside, a desk lamp casts a warm circle of light over aged papers, their edges yellowed, their ink faded but deliberate. A man, older now, slower, turns a page with care. He pauses, reads a sentence twice. It is Dag Hammarskjöld's handwriting, tight, controlled, certain. Outside this room, the Cold War has officially ended. Walls have fallen, flags have changed, archives have opened. But this story has not closed. The man behind the office. Hammarskjöld was never meant to be remembered as a symbol. He disliked monuments. He avoided publicity. He once wrote that leadership was a burden to be carried quietly. His private journal, published only after his death, reveals a man deeply aware of his isolation and accepting of it. He knew what neutrality cost. He also knew what abandoning it would cost the world. Those closest to him recalled that, in his final months, Hammarskjöld seemed calmer than ever. Not relieved, not hopeful, resolved, as if the decision had already been made. A template no one followed. After Ndola, the United Nations continued. Peacekeeping expanded in size, but narrowed in ambition. Missions became more carefully negotiated, more politically constrained. Every action was weighed not against principle, but against remection. Successive secretaries general spoke of balance, of consultation, of restraint. None spoke of defiance, not because they lacked courage, but because they had seen the price of independence firsthand. Hammarskjöld had proven that the UN could act as something more than a stage. His death proved how dangerous that idea was. Whispers in the records. As decades passed, fragments emerged. A memo referencing radar contacts never followed up. A flight log that listed an aircraft that should not have been there. An intelligence intercept with names redacted too thoroughly. Each discovery reignited the same questions, and each time the trail went cold, not erased, just unfinished. Investigators would later describe it as institutional exhaustion, the moment when truth becomes too disruptive to pursue further. The families who waited. For the families of those who died aboard the DC-6B, time did not soften the loss. 16 men. 16 stories interrupted. They attended inquiries, read reports, listened to conclusions that concluded nothing. Some believed it was an accident, others did not. All agreed on one thing. They had never been told the whole truth. The weight of one decision. In lectures and history books, Hammarskjöld is often described as an idealist, but idealism does not explain his final flight. Realism does. He understood power, understood leverage, understood fear, and he understood that fear worked both ways. By refusing to align, he denied the superpowers the certainty they depended on. That uncertainty, brief as it was, forced hesitation, and hesitation, in the nuclear age, could mean survival. Why they hesitated. So why did both the CIA and the KGB think twice? Not because Hammarskjöld threatened them, but because he made them irrelevant. He did not ask permission. He did not respond to pressure. He did not follow the script. In a system built on control, he introduced autonomy, and autonomy cannot be predicted. Chakras, the final silence. Dag Hammarskjöld never explained himself. He did not leave a final note. He did not justify his choices. He did not accuse. He simply acted and accepted the consequences. The silence he left behind was not emptiness. It was a challenge to every institution that claimed neutrality but feared independence, to every leader who chose safety over principle, to every system that demanded allegiance at the expense of conscience. Darshwar, what remains. Today, his name appears on buildings, awards, and memorials, but his true legacy is harder to honor. It lives in unanswered questions, in moments when power pauses, in the rare decision to stand still while the world demands a side. The Cold War ended without him, but it did not forget him, because for a brief moment, measured not in years, but in resolve, one unknown man made both empires hesitate, and that hesitation still echoes.